Aloha, aloha and welcome. I believe we're just preparing to start in a few minutes. We're ready to start. Aloha, aloha and welcome. Glad everyone is here. Aloha, aloha. I believe we're ready to start now. Aloha. My name is Denise Conan. I'm the Dean of the College of Social Sciences, University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for coming today. This is afternoon here in Hawaii. It's the morning in Japan. This is the first of a three-part series that the College of Social Sciences is hosting on ties between Hawaii and Japan, and they are multiple. We're going to be focused on different aspects of Hawaii's relationship with Japan, and this is an important component of our outreach and our mission as a University of Hawaii. You know, Japan and Hawaii have had long time economic relations going back to like 1880 when the first immigrants came to Hawaii. This was one of the first destinations for immigrants out of Japan. And we have currently such a, Japan relations are such a vibrant part of our economy, of our society, of so many aspects of what makes us who we are today. And so we felt that it's very important that the university support Hawaii and Japan relations in various ways, people to people relations, but also the economic vitality that runs between our two locations. Today's webinar is focused on economics, our economic ties. And these ties are so important to Hawaii's economy, but also Japan's economy as well, as you'll see. As you'll see today through the exciting panelists that we have arranged for you. But there has been no time in recent memory that our relations have been so shaken by the COVID-19 virus. So we are really in a unprecedented time, and we need the best thoughts to lead our way forward. I want to just, before we get started and dive into our panelists, frame a little bit about this initiative. So again, this is a initiative of the College of Social Sciences. We are partnering with JASH, the Japan American Society of Hawaii, in this effort. And we're very pleased to have that partnership. Many of you on the webinar today are from JASH, and we appreciate this collaboration with Hawaii's business community. We're also collaborating with the University of Hawaii Alumni Association, and many people on this webinar are alumni of the university here in Hawaii and also in Japan and also globally. I've seen the list. It's exciting to see how many people are interested in this list. In fact, many participants signed up for this webinar today. We're also partnering with the UH Foundation that is helping us to produce this economic series, and we're excited about that. We have plans in the College of Social Sciences and at UH Manoa to deepen our ties with Japan with more dedicated webinars like this, but also economic initiatives and research, educational activities as well, and other sorts of ties. And I do welcome ideas from you, from our alumni, our community, about how we should strengthen these ties and what we can do for you. So please do feel free to reach out to us. And this is a dialogue today. So we welcome your questions. Many of you submitted questions going into this dialogue. We will get to those. There's a Q&A box, and you're welcome to submit your questions to the Q&A box. So with that, I'm just so pleased to introduce a dynamic panel today. I've hand-selected some very good friends of mine who are also just thought leaders in our community around issues of Japan and Hawaii collaborations. And I'm going to kick off our panelist discussion with introducing to you my good friend, Dr. Sumner LaCroix. Sumner is a retired faculty member. He is a professor emeritus with the University of Hawaii Economics Department. He's an economic historian and has written extensively on topics across Hawaii and Asia. Most recently, he's completed a book on the 800-year history of Hawaii's economy, and he's doing much work in terms of Hawaii's response to the COVID-19 situation. So I will turn it to Sumner LaCroix. Sumner.
All right, thank you, Denise. There we go. The slide showing okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Good. So I want to note that my topic today, reopening tourism from Japan to Hawaii in the age of COVID-19, that this webinar is accompanied by a UHERO policy brief, and that policy brief should be available tomorrow evening. We were hoping to have it for the webinar today, but just not the case. It'll be issued tomorrow evening, and I gave the link here on the first slide. I should note too that the policy brief is authored by two co-authors who both have extensive experience in public health and epidemiology. Tim Brown, a senior fellow at the East West Center, and F. DeWolf Miller, who's a professor emeritus of epidemiology from the John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaii. Yesterday, as far as Japanese tourism went, since I'm talking about the reopening of Japan-Hawaiʻi tourism, yesterday, Governor David Ige at Honolulu International Airport announced that Japan-Hawaiʻi tourism would reopen on November 6th. Okay, and I think, as you all know, that tourism from Japan has been closed since late March, early April, because of the pandemic. There really haven't been any there haven't been any flights that contain tourists since then. So the reopening of the Japan sector is big news for Hawaii. Earlier in the month of October, we started to move to open up the tourism from the United States. Tourism from the rest of Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe is still closed. How important is this for Hawaii? It's a big deal for Hawaii to reopen its tourism sector. So counting direct, indirect, and spillover spending of tourists, they account for 23% of the economy. That's about $22 billion a year. And that's a big deal for an economy that's only about $100 billion a year. It's more than a fifth of our economy. And because that sector's been shut down for so long, that also tells you a lot about why we're facing record unemployment and big drops in GDP over the second and third quarters of the year. How important is tourism from Japan? Well, you know, the last year that we have complete data for is 2019. There was 1.5 million arrivals in 2019. Japanese tourists spent $2.25 billion in direct spending. When we adjust for indirect and induced spending, we find that it was roughly $4 billion, or it's about 4.5% of the Hawaii economy. It's a big deal. It's the difference between the economy having some economic growth and being in recession. Hawaii's current plan for screening air passengers from Japan, just announced yesterday, parallels the plan that we have for screening air passengers from the United States. So basically, a visitor from Japan has to take a PCR test, the gold standard of COVID tests, within 72 hours of departure from a list of trusted partners. It's available on a website. You can only get a test from those trusted providers. The testing starts November 4th. Not only do you have to do the testing, but submit the temperature checks and answer questions about recent contacts and travel history. In exchange, if there's a negative test, Hawaii will waive its still in effect 14-day quarantine for passengers if they have a negative PCR test. And Passengers also have to use the Hawaii Safe Travels app. There's a Japanese version that's still under development. Hopefully it will be finalized in the next few days. So when will service start? Okay, so the testing will start on November 4th. 3 airlines, Hawaiian Airlines, Japan Airlines, and ANA will start service on November 6th. There's only going to be 10 flights in total, I think all from Tokyo, during the month of November. So we're going to see a flight about every 2-3 days coming on in. Not much, but it's a start. Maybe it's good to start small because that might give us a chance to get any kinks out of the system. Really, larger scale tourism is going to start up from mid-December. Airlines are planning more flights for more cities and more airports in Japan from mid-December. Now, Hawaii was closed to tourism for 6 months during the COVID epidemic because we felt that by being isolated that would protect us from major outbreaks of COVID-19 in Hawaii. And to some extent it has. We still have relatively low cases per capita. We've had some bullets in COVID, the last part of March and the first part of April. That went away for a while during May and June, but the virus resurged in July, August, and then we've had a slow tamping down in cases since then. So what do we need to do to start up tourism effectively and safely from Japan to the United States? 2 things. One is that Hawaii residents need to conclude, on the basis of evidence, that Japanese tourists are not going to be a source of community transmission in Hawaii. And Japanese tourists need to conclude it's safe to fly to and from Hawaii, to spend time in Hawaii, that we have our epidemic under control, that they're not going to be infected in Hawaii, and that there's the potential to have a good time. Okay, so to inform our discussion, my team uses data and projections on estimated COVID-19 cases that have been developed by the International Health Metrics and Evaluation Group at the University of Washington, probably the world's leading place in putting together these types of forecasts on COVID. And we want to see whether or not the 2 conditions are satisfied. So will Japanese tourists contribute to community transmission of COVID-19 in Hawaii? Are they safe? Are they coming here relatively COVID-free? And the answer is that Japanese tourists are very safe. They're not going to contribute to community transmission. And the reason why is Japan has a really low prevalence of COVID-19 in its population. Just 19.8 people on October 23rd, the model estimates, had COVID out of every 100,000 people. Compare that with California, where the prevalence is 264 per 100,000 people. So the prevalence is more than 13 times lower in Japan than in California. Thus, if tourists from Japan and California both take the same COVID test pre-departure, a visitor from Japan will be 13 times less likely to be infected than one from California. And I think the California tourists are pretty safe. We estimate just a tenth of a Japanese passenger out of every 5,000 will be carrying COVID with them to Hawaii. Adjusted, that means only 1 passenger out of every 50,000. That's really, really small. In the context of the epidemic the world is experiencing, this is great. If Japanese tourists continue to wear masks in Hawaii, there's not going to be any transmission from Japanese tourists to people working in Waikiki, to other tourists, or to the local population in Hawaii. Saying no is a bit of a strong statement, but whatever transmission occurs is likely to be very minimal. Here's a map of where we've been in Hawaii. We had that very first initial little hill, then we had the big hill that came up in August, in late July, August, that persisted into early December, and since has been falling. This is really quite comforting. This is quite comforting to us because we're getting a feeling that we're getting our epidemic under control. But we really need to be careful here. We need to be careful because if we look at the estimated new infections per day in Hawaii, estimated new infections per day in Hawaii are expected to triple over the next 3 months. Okay. Now, again, if we look around us, we look at the declining caseloads, we go outdoors, we see people wearing masks, and we're wondering why the infections expected to triple. Well, they're expected to triple because of holiday gatherings due to Halloween, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the parties leading up to Christmas and New Year's, as well as seasonal disease factors. And the fact that Hawaii is still not, still is doing a pretty good job with masks, but not a great job with masks. What's the keys to controlling the Hawaii epidemic? And I've argued before that if we want a good economy in Hawaii and we want to attract tourists, what we need to do is to control our own epidemic. If we present ourselves as a relatively safe destination, and we are a relatively safe destination, people will want to come here. And so it's the standard things. But now look what would happen. Look at the arrow there. If people move their masking rate up from the 76% that we have right now up to 95%. If we did that, we would find that the increase in cases would be minimal over the next few months. And we'd be able to ride out this third wave in much better shape than places in the mainland United States. And what we otherwise would have if we didn't adhere to better masking. We need to do this because if there's major outbreaks in Hawaii, we're going to find that neither Japanese nor US tourists are going to want to come here. How many Japanese are going to decide to vacation Hawaii over the next 5 months? I hate to say this, but very few. And the main reason why is that even though you can now come to Hawaii with a PCR test and be exempted from our 14-day quarantine, when Japan travelers return to Japan, they're subject to Japan's 14-day quarantine. There is no test that will give you a get out of quarantine free card. Now, who are the people who might choose to come to Hawaii? I'm thinking retired affluent seniors who have time, that a 14-day quarantine when they get home is something they can handle. They're not missing work. And maybe these would be people who are somewhat affluent and have some prior travel experience to Hawaii. Maybe young married couples who are working from home. They might find quarantine after their trip not that different from their daily lives of staring at screens and having takeout brought in. If the Hawaii prevalence rate, if the amount of infection in Hawaii, the percent of the population infected with COVID dropped to levels approximately those in Japan, then Japan might lift the quarantine, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. I'm just going to skip ahead to the conclusions. Basically, Hawaii's ability to host and welcome all visitors, U.S. or Japanese visitors, depends on how well we control our epidemic and how confident we are that tourists are relatively COVID-free. Tourism is a huge part of our economy. We need to open it to succeed over the next year. We don't need to worry so much about Japanese tourism right now. Japanese tourists are safe. They're extremely unlikely to be carrying COVID with them. Will Japanese tourists come back to Hawaii? Unfortunately, very few because of the 14-day quarantine upon return. The policy's not really set up for success. And that's something policymakers need to think about. Hawaii's big challenge still is can it cope with the third wave of the epidemic that's expected over the next few months. Thank you very much. Mahalo.
Thank you, Sumner. Thanks so much. Well, now I want to turn to a Japan perspective. And for that, I welcome Yasuo Tanabe, a good friend of mine. Tanabe-san, he began his career at the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's been a trade negotiator between US and Japan and other free trade areas, ASEAN and others. Many of us know him from his time with Hitachi, where he was a senior vice president and executive officer with Hitachi and was very active. He was like Hitachi's ambassador to Hawaii. And he spent much time with us on many different projects, ranging from the Maui Smart Grid to even our rail system here today. He is now a CEO with Global Link Lab. He's the CEO of Global Link Lab. He's also a visiting scholar with the College of Social Sciences, University of Hawaii at Manoa, as well as senior advisor with the Northeast Asia Economic Forum. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome Tanabe-san.
Thank you, Denise. Aloha, everybody. I'm very honored to be invited to speak here. The most important subject for me now. I have prepared a slide, so let's go through. Yes, I'm going to talk about first, this is the very basic why Japan and Hawaii need each other. Many of you know, of course, we have historical cultural ties and a very important security framework, US-Japan alliance, and growing center of the world is Asia-Pacific. So Asia-Pacific context. And now we are entering into post-pandemic socio-economic system. There are many hints between Japan and Hawaii. Next. So let me think about what kind of sectors or fields we can work together. I have listed several sectors from my experience and my idea. So let's go through one by one. Next. First is very much conceptual, visionary thing. We should work for new normal. And there are nowadays many discussions going on around the world. What kind of society or what kind of economy we should have. United Nations promoting sustainable development goals, of course, all of you know. In Japan, especially what the discussion has been going on, what for the companies. And historically, there is a saying, sampo yoshi. Sampo yoshi means triple satisfaction. So good for seller, good for buyer, and good for society or community. So always, historically, Japanese companies are for society, not for profit. That's the Japanese thinking. And nowadays, Japan is sharing the idea of society 5.0. This is simply target better society by digital technologies. I noticed in the US also there is a discussion on what kind of capitalism, especially companies should aim for in the discussion at the business roundtable and so on. And I'm very much encouraged that US business people now thinking about stakeholders' importance. That's good. And Hawaii, I understand there has been a long tradition of aloha aina. So there are common things through these ideas. So we, Japan and Hawaii can work together. Okay, sector by sector. First, I like to mention energy, sustainable energy. Hitachi has been involved in the Maui Smart Grid projects. And we have demonstrated many technologies, including V2H or V2G, meaning vehicle to home or vehicle to grid. So ample renewable energies can be stored in the electric vehicles, and then those electricity can be discharged from vehicle to home or grid. So this is good too. And now TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, is investing in the company called Adon Group to promote renewable energies. So this is the example of energy. Next. Digital economy we are entering into now, and there are many aspects of digital economy, digital transformation. I just like to introduce some examples of digital transformation of social infrastructure. One is NEC. NEC is a good company. They are introducing thermal temperature screening systems into Honolulu Airport. And also, I like to mention Hitachi's rail system. Hitachi has demonstrated the operation of on-demand. Japanese rail system has been famous for on time, but this rail system can be operated on demand. That's the technology we have. Next. And talking about rail, you know, of course, there will be a new rail system coming in. The partial opening will be soon, I guess. And along these new rail lines, there are good chances for community development. It is called transit-oriented development. Some discussions going on, And I hope there will be some Japanese inputs into those transit-oriented development. Next, please. And then healthcare. You know, I have been believing Hawaii is the best place for medical tourism. There are many places competing for medical tourism, attracting tourists, patients. And Hawaii should be the place. That's my belief, especially for cancer patients. Cancer patients want to live a better life while being treated. So this is a bit of a commercial by Hitachi, but there should be a high advanced cancer treatment systems like proton beam therapy. Okay, next. Next is food and agriculture and agro-tourism. I know Hawaii has plenty of resources available all over all the islands. And the Japanese nowadays love agro-tourism. So many tourists want to experience at the farm for agriculture experience. That's a good attraction for Hawaii. Next, please. And higher education is important because higher education is a growing industry in the world. And at the same time, they are impacting economy as a whole. So why not University of Hawaii should be collaborating with Japanese universities and Japanese entities for further high value added education system. Next. And I'd like to touch upon local to local exchanges. Hawaii is a local area. Hawaii is not a nation like Japan. And Japan consists of many local areas. And I know Hawaii has a sister relationship with those prefectures like Fukuoka, Okinawa, Hiroshima, Ehime, Hokkaido, and so on. So let's take advantage of those local to local exchanges. Okay, next. So in conclusion, I like to say Hawaii and Japan should reconfirm their mutual importance. And secondly, Hawaii and Japan should work together to demonstrate models of post-pandemic socio-economic system. And number three, there are plenty of fields and channels of partnership or collaboration. And number four, University of Hawaii is a main industry player as well as a catalyst of economic transactions between Hawaii and Japan. So I'll be happy to work for further Hawaii-Japan relationship. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thank you, Tanabe-san. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate how you're expanding our vision beyond tourism to look at new aspects of economic ties and relations between Japan and Hawaii. Really appreciate that. I do want to remind everybody that we welcome your questions. Please do submit questions as you think about them for any of our panelists. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce to you also my good friend Takaho Iwasaki. Takaho is, she was actually born in the US in New York City, but grew up in Kagoshima, Japan. And she was also has history working with the Japanese media company Fuji Television. She came to Hawaii and resides now in Hawaii. She is an alumni of the University of Hawaii, having an MBA. And she's established Meiji Connection here. I wanted to bring Takaho into this conversation to look at how we can lead a more innovative direction, especially involving small and medium-sized enterprises, startups, and things like that. So I turn it to Takaho. Mahalo.
Thank you very much. You guys seeing my presentation?
Yes, yes, we
Okay,
can
great.
see it. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Aloha, everybody. Thank you for sparing your time today. I would like to talk about the economic ties between Japan and Hawaii from Japanese innovation opportunity standpoint. Sorry. Okay. My first statement might be too shocking to you, but don't you think Japan has been losing the technological competition over the past 15 years? These are made in Japan technology in 80s and 90s. We had those legendary tech items, and almost all of the good products are made in Japan at the time. This is a current technology that we use. It is almost impossible to find made in Japan product. The one reason there are not many made in Japan technology anymore is due to the big shift in technology moving from manufacturing hardware to AI and a data-driven service. Japan couldn't catch up with the shift. A lot of Japanese business is still stuck in pre-technology era, which is focusing on the manufacturing and hardware. So going back to the first question, are we losing the technology competition? Even seeing these facts, I would say no. In order to explain this, I must talk about Japanese history a little bit. There are 3 phases for technological revolution. The first phase is that of time around creating a new technology, such as innovating electronicity. Phase 2 is for adaptation, such as creating TV or commodity light bulb by adopting those new technology. Phase 3 is creating a complicated ecosystem by connecting all technology, such as network or entire transportation system. Let's see what happened to Japan when the first modern technology showed up in the other parts of the world in 1750. During this time, we were still in the middle of Edo period under Tokugawa Yoshimune, who was the 9th shogun. It was actually after Meiji Restoration when Japan started to embrace the innovation and caught up with the other countries' technology. This is my main point. Japan has been good at innovating new technology. We have been always good at technological adaptation and creating a high quality ecosystem. If we at the phase 2 in terms of AI and data technology, Japan will thrive more at the later phases, which is coming up soon. Therefore, I believe Japan will continue to innovate and thrive again in the world economy. There's one more reason why I believe the power of Japan for innovation. If you ever lived in Japan, you must have watched these anime or comics in Japan. These animes were made in 60s to 90s. Surprisingly, you can see a lot of technology that you are actually using right now. Watching these animes always made me so proud of being Japanese, which has a creativity and imagination to look at the future. Made in Japan is also known as high quality brands and products. It is also impossible to find this level of high quality products anywhere in the world. With this imagination and professionality to make high quality product, I believe Japan can be thrive and be innovative again. Now, I would like to talk how Hawaii can collaborate with Japan to innovate and help both economies. There are 2 factors that I believe Japan is missing in order to grow our economy again: education and entrepreneurship. Especially for education, we have a very deep program. I won't talk about detail, but basically a lot of young people are missing a lot of opportunity to learn STEM education, practical English, and creative thinking. I was also one of the students too that I had a very hard time to learn English, even I was in a Japanese English education for 10 years. Because of this poor education system, we don't have a good ecosystem for entrepreneurs. A lot of students lack local community knowledge, so it is hard to find problems in their community, which could be very good start for them to be an entrepreneur. Even they have a very good skills or high quality professionalisms, their capability for market adoption and expansion strategy is not high due to the lack of understanding local community and creative thinking. I believe Hawaii could play a very important role to fill cover missing parts. In education, a lot of students are already coming to Hawaii to learn English. All Hawaii must do is to extend this English program to include more practical or community-based learning. For example, practical internship for Japanese students to learn how to work or do business, contribute to community with American style. Hawaii has a lot of advantage for doing this compared to other states. A lot of states, students have already interested in Japan, so it is easier for Japanese students to create a network with local people here. It is also easier for Japanese to live in Hawaii as a first step to experience outside of Japan because of the influence of Asian culture and the low language barrier here. Even for entrepreneurs and startups, Hawaii is a great place as a first stepping stone to expand outside of Japan. Let's do more trial projects of Japanese startups and entrepreneurs. Through those projects, we can bring more Japanese investors and corporations to see and invest them. The advantage of Hawaii for Japanese startups is Japanese-friendly environment, which Hawaii has been establishing through the tourism. I believe it's the right time for Hawaii to utilize those environmental advantage. In Japan, there are some cities such as Kobe and Kyoto who provide 1-year visa and a tax exemption to invite foreign startups to Japan. Hawaii should consider this kind of initiative to diversify our economy and bring more startups and economy from Japan to Hawaii. As an island community, having similar problems as Japan does is also an advantage. We have a lot of interesting startups in Hawaii who has unique ideas and technology. And those ideas could be a big solution to the problem that we have in Japan. Here's one Japanese startup case where they are trying to expand their business in Niue through Hawaii. Bakan is a Japanese startup which can create organic social distance by visualizing congestion level using sensors to show which areas are crowded or not. One of the reasons why Japan could successfully stop spreading COVID-19 was partly due to use of this type of technology. Bakan is a very mature startup who has Japanese national companies as a customer, and they're looking at the Hawaii as their opportunity. If we can install this type of technology as a role model in the US market, we can not only take advantage of technology, but also we can invite a lot of their investors and their clients who will want to see how the technology is being applied in the US. I believe we should cultivate this kind of opportunity. Hawaii startup can take a lot of advantage from Japanese investors. I organized the first pitch event for Hawaii startups to present their business idea to Japanese corporations and investors, which is called Island Innovation Demo Day. A lot of people told me it wouldn't work because they thought Japanese people would never think of Hawaii as a business place, but it worked. One of the startups got a 6-figure investment from multiple Japanese angel investors, and 2 of the startups have been working on a joint venture with Japanese companies. And also, we're going to do the Island Innovation Demo Day 2020 by online with a partnership with the Dentsu, which is the biggest Japanese marketing agency. There's one more reason why I emphasize the importance of diversifying business partners for coming to Hawaii and to start collaborating with Japan in terms of technology and education. This is a survey which asked Japanese if they still wanted to go traveling for leisure under COVID or after COVID. More than 70% of them want to go to international traveling at least for 2 years. Are Japanese coming back to vacation traveling to Hawaii? The answer is yes. But there is a high possibility that typical Japanese tourists won't come back to Hawaii just for vacation for a while. We really needed to give them a different reasons to come to Hawaii in addition to just vacation and other typical experiences in Hawaii. COVID-19 has accelerated change of Japanese way of thinking and behavior significantly. All Hawaii needs is flexibility and adaptation for Japanese changing, so both of us can be innovative and thrive our economy in different way as island community from any other regions. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Lastly, they are my reference for today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Takaho. Well, this was such a wide-ranging discussion about the economic linkages between Hawaii and Japan. I'd like to welcome back our panelists for some Q&A, and there's a active discussion happening on the Q&A chat box. Please do continue to submit your questions. I was really heartened to see some good friends asking questions. I'm happy to see that you're out there and joining our webinar today. I did want to open up with some questions. There are quite a number around what is going on with tourism. For one, can Hawaii residents go to Japan, and what's the consequences? Do we have to go through a 14-day quarantine if we go there? Are we even able to get a visa? And when might some of this restriction lift? Sumner, you had some thoughts on this, but Tanabe-san, maybe you know something as well. Tanabe, would you like to respond?
Oh, Sumner can.
Sumner? Okay, well, Sumner, what do you know about what is going on?
My understanding is essentially travel is closed, except for there's people who can get special visas. But tourists cannot get them. Tourists and business people from Hawaii would have a difficult time entering Japan now. For very specific reasons it can be done, but in general, no. I think a lot of that is just that Japan has benefited from closing its borders to incoming tourists and business people from other countries. It has a very low rate of COVID prevalence. I mean, it's a very small percentage of people in the country are infected. Travelers coming in are much more likely to be infected. Even when PCR tests are done, there's still going to be people who get through the testing barrier. And I think Hawaii still has a high enough prevalence rate, we have enough COVID infection in Hawaii that it's just unlikely that Japan will be admitting Hawaii residents anytime soon.
Okay, and a related question is coming in from Ichiro Daito, a good friend of mine. I'm going to turn this to Tanabe-san. It's looking at, well, no, maybe this is a better question for Sumner as I look at it. Medical treatment in Hawaii. So Japan visitors who may think they would come here, can we assure them that they're safe? What is the condition currently with medical availability if someone were to contract COVID-19 while they're here as a visitor, as a tourist? You know, are the treatment facilities available? I think it goes to Tanabe's medical tourism, though I don't think people are hoping to come here for
no.
That's not medical COVID tourism. Experience.
That's unintended medical tourism.
Yes.
You know, in general, we do have enough capacity to treat tourists unless we have massive outbreaks, which I don't expect to see. I mean, I think because we are PCR screening, we're basically having people take a COVID test before they depart for Hawaii. The people coming in are relatively COVID free. And I don't expect to see many outbreaks among tourists. For those people who do get sick, there's just a few things. We have much more capacity here in Oahu than we have on the neighbor islands. The neighbor islands has relatively thin medical capacity, but it's there. I mean, you know, people haven't been turned away at neighbor island hospitals, even when we've had outbreaks. Tourists would not be turned away. Payment for medical care in the United States, it's always something you should think about before you travel. I mean, getting travel insurance prior to travel is always a good idea. Trying to figure out what would happen if you were stuck with the bills, okay? Because there will be bills. Medical care in the United States is not free to foreign visitors.
Akihito Kawara is asking, are people here in Hawaii wearing masks? Are we safe? What is our practice here? Takaho, what do you think about this? Are we, do you think this is safe practices here? I see when I go out to the grocery store, everyone has a mask. If you go to Costco, people are wearing masks. Maybe it's when Oh yeah, this is, maybe it's when we're having social, is there social gatherings? What is your experience, Takaho?
I definitely think more and more people wearing masks, especially compared to other states in the US. I guess it's because the Asian culture, I'm not sure why, but definitely sometimes when I walk outside, some people are not wearing masks. I'm not sure if they are exercise or they're just not wearing, but I think a pretty good ratio of people wearing masks, especially inside a building, because they kind of like, it's a regulation.
I think that's right. We have Professor Jack Burrill is a CDC. He's a psychology professor with us, but also with the CDC, and he did a study and found that Hawaii is much more compliant to mask wearing than almost any other state in the nation.
The figures that I've seen show us with about 70%, 76% mask usage compared to 49% for the United States. And that compares to about 86% for Japan. So that's one reason why Japan has such a low rate, is that extra amount of masking really helps. A lot of our problems too have not come just from masking. In Hawaii, they've come from people deciding that they're going to attend a funeral with 100 people, or they're going to attend a church service for 100 people. Just not taking enough precautions in a group setting where people are family, peers, and friends, and they feel like they must be safe. When that's just a bad presumption during an epidemic. Even family and friends can be infected with COVID.
Okay, so we're getting a number of questions about how you start a business here in Hawaii and how we can be attracting the small and medium-sized enterprises in Hawaii. This is a good question for Tanabe-san and Iwasaki as well. What is it that Hawaii needs to do to attract investment from Japan?
I have worked for Hitachi, and we had a project like Jump Smart Maui. But this is funded by the Japanese government for demonstration purpose. Then thereafter, we have pursued some real businesses. But very frankly, Hitachi may be too large for Hawaii businesses. So I would think small and medium-sized enterprises would be fitting for more Hawaii businesses. That's why I'm saying, why don't you take advantage of local to local connections like Fukuoka, like Hiroshima. Governor Ogawa of Fukuoka, Governor Yuzaki of Fukuoka, both from my ministry, Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry. Ogawa-san is my senpai, and Yuzaki-san is my kohai. They are very much business oriented, and they love Hawaii. So why don't you attract more SMEs from Fukuoka or Hiroshima or many other parts of Japan?
I agree with Tanabe-san. I think it's a good idea to approach more small businesses, also startups in Japan. It's actually, if you go to Silicon Valley, there's a lot of Japanese companies, including big and small companies, want to go visit the Silicon Valley to learn the DFE style. But unfortunately, we are not favorable companies to Silicon Valley. So usually we go there, spend so much money visiting office, but we barely learn anything. But if we can attract those startups and small, medium-sized business who are also interested in startup, we can attract a lot of people to come to Hawaii for business reasons. And then actually, I really agree with Tanabe-san. Through my Island Innovation Demo Day, I really have to ask like big companies sponsorship. But usually, if the decision, not like, it's kind of like the person in the company agree with my idea, sometimes they have a hard time convince their boss. It's like, oh, sorry, we can't expense the trip to Hawaii as a business expense. It's such a big stupid reason, but that's actually true. But when it comes with the startups, a small company, they can easily kind of like decide because we can approach the decision maker. When I did first events, or even planning this time, surprisingly, a lot of Japanese startups wants to come to Hawaii. And I guess once we list up the fertility quality in Japan, I think I have a lot of Japanese startups coming in to considering the expansion strategy in the US market.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so we're getting a number of questions that I need to jump in and answer about Japanese universities and how they can interact here in Hawaii. And I really appreciate that. We have a number of our university partners here on this webinar. And in the spring, we're going to have another webinar focused on some of these engagements. But they're asking whether Japanese universities could send a cohort of students here to Hawaii. You know, how might this work? And let me answer that. Right now, we are planning with a number of universities, actually a very innovative set of programs of virtual study abroad. And we are doing online, so they range from short-term virtual study abroad programs where we're customizing it with our partners in different universities. This includes Konan University, it includes Kagoshima University. And we are also planning for some in-person cohorts to come in the spring. So hopefully the rates that Sumner showed of a decline will continue declining COVID cases, and it will be perfectly safe to welcome cohorts here for in-person short-term programs. So Tohoku University is working on a plan like that with us. We're also looking at developing short-term or curriculum programs like certificate programs where students could come for even a semester or longer, and we can integrate English language with that. So if people are interested, please do email me, contact me, conan@hawaii.edu. I'm happy to talk to you about the different options we have. Okay, there's other kinds of questions. There's a number of people are asking about the aging society in Japan. Since Japan is an aging society, what should we expect here in Hawaii? Does that mean we should be thinking of a different kind of visitor coming to Hawaii, a more aging visitor, retired visitor? What does it mean for business? What should we be thinking about with the changing demographics? Any one of you?
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting that the Japanese market has been a declining market for Hawaii for a while. I mean, the market peaked in 1977 with almost 2.5 million arrivals per year. We're now down to a little over 1.5 million arrivals. So there's been substantial decline in the Japanese market. And I think part of that is just because even though we think of old people in retirement traveling, actually people tend to travel a little bit less in their older years. Their health sometimes isn't quite as good. They're worried about their financial situation if they live too long, et cetera. But older people do still travel. One of the interesting things with Hawaii is we've all these people who've come to Hawaii 2 or 3 times prior to becoming a senior person in Japan. And the question is, are those people going to just say, my money may be a little tight, my health may be a little poor, but am I going to continue going to Hawaii? And they might. You really don't know. There's a lot of uncertainties there. I still see potential for a vibrant senior market from Japan. But that's another thing too that we have to think about. How would we cater to that particular market? I mean, that's something where in the old days, heading back 20 years ago, the market was to a very large extent younger people who often won office pools for best performance in the office. And say a group of 5 managers would win a trip with their families to come to Hawaii. So it was people in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s. Today, it's gotten to be an older group. And so, yeah, the market is changing, and we have to make ongoing adjustments to that.
Yeah, this is a good chance for Hawaii. There are many rich senior Japanese people, or not so much rich, but people who are ready to spend some money for good experience. And Hawaii can offer good experience for those Japanese senior people. So this is a very good chance for Hawaii.
Hawaii likes to do blitzkrieg advertising advertising campaigns to kind of seize the moment sometimes. And
Also.
maybe this is the time to run advertising in Japan saying that we're about the only place open. We welcome Japanese tourists. Yeah, you face the 14-day quarantine, but hey, you know, come on and visit. It's really something that we ought to think about.
Yes.
And we're getting a number of questions too about this idea that Yasuo, you proposed about agriculture and tourism, and Takaho, you and I have talked about this as well too, that the way Hawaii does agriculture are the products we offer here. So what would that kind of experience be like? Especially Maui is asking about this. Can visitors take products back, ag products back? There's such restrictions on transport of agricultural products. Can they, you know, what can they take into Japan? But how might we think about agro-tourism and even agro-business opportunities?
Yeah, of course, there is a strict regulation in Japan. So no, you know, wild vegetables, fruits cannot be brought in to Japan. But there are certain procedures for testing those products. So, and the Japanese Minister of Agriculture or Minister of Health has to work out product by product. Once they clear this procedure, then they are freely coming into Japan. Like you know, beef jerky sold in ABC store. They clear the Japanese procedure, so the tourists can buy many beef jerkies from Hawaii to Japan.
Oh, wonderful. We have so many questions coming in and we only have a few minutes left. Takaho, there's some questions about, are there likely individual investors or corporate investors that are interested in CCRC kinds of projects here? What are your thoughts about that?
It's such a good question. It's very difficult to answer because actually there's many ongoing projects that I actually do, and then so the answer is yes. But then Hawaii really have to make more effort to promote the side of Hawaii to Japan. As I said, it's a little bit difficult to convince Japanese company to see Hawaii as a business opportunity.
So do we have accelerators here or incubators here that are focused on this kind of thing? What are we doing in that way? Like plug and play in Hawaii for startups?
We do have a lot of, not a lot, but then some of the accelerator, which is surprising. And then one of the big significant, not big, but then a significant one is a blue startup. And also I would say elementary accelerator is pretty big accelerator, which in focus on energy, sustainability, and agriculture. The way they use is, even there we don't have made in Hawaii startup, a lot of California, especially agri-tech and also the sustainable startup, come to Hawaii, test their product in Hawaii, and also then they bring back to mainland. It's like Alexa. So I think Hawaii, Japanese startup should do it. And then when I talk to Japanese startup, they're like, oh, that's a good idea. I really want to come to Hawaii. And then I have a more Japanese startup right now, more than before. And now a lot of big companies started to interested in, because those big companies actually invest of those startups. So I think that's kind of how the good way to approach them.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're getting so many questions and we're not going to have enough time here. I do want to give our panelists my gratitude and my thanks. I do want to also encourage everyone to stay tuned. If you're interested in further workshops like this, we will be having future webinars on topics in the future. I want to just see, is there a final last few words that each of you want to say? Takaho, would you, any wrap up comments?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys are interested in Japanese startup, please contact me.
And
okay.
Yasuo?
Yes, now Hawaii can accept me as a tourist, so I love to visit Hawaii again. But the problem is Japan. Japan is strict regulation, so I need to be a 14-day quarantine. When to lift this regulation, this is very much up to Hawaii's situation, infection ratio. I've been to my friend, Foreign Minister Motegi on this. Foreign Minister Motegi is a vice chairman of Hawaii-Japan Friendship League. So he is concerned. So if the infection ratio has come down to like Japan level, then we can freely travel between Hawaii and Japan, which I hope coming soon.
I hope that comes soon. And, you know, maybe this just means you need to stay for a very long time when you come here. Sumner, do you have any final words to say?
You know, I'm really optimistic about the future of U.S.-Japan relations. There are all sorts of places where we can cooperate, and I don't think they've been fully exploited. And I expect to see them be better exploited in the future. And you know, I think that what Yasuo was saying, I think really does go back to what Hawaii needs to do is to control its epidemic. And then we can see more free-flowing travel between both from Japan to Hawaii and from Hawaii to Japan start up again. I think that's really critical. Face-to-face meetings, no matter how nice these Zoom conferences are really critical for in particular for Hawaii-Japanese relations.
We are looking forward to face-to-face engagement coming up soon. In the meanwhile, I want to give my mahalo, my thank you to our panelists and to all of you who joined in with us today. It was wonderful to have you, such a dynamic set of questions and discussions, and look forward to seeing you next time. Ahui ho, mahalo. Thank you.
Mahalo.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Bye-bye.